for security. For security purposes, we don't have the chat open, and folks who are not presenting don't have the ability to unmute yourselves. But if you need something, please feel free to message me throughout this, and I will pass it up to Ganesha.
Buffalo, foresee pronouns. I'm the South Advocate for Gender Justice League.
James, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm James, he, him pronouns. I am just joined the legislative advocacy team this year, and it's been awesome. I'm texting with Jessica. She's trying to get in right now, but
okay. Do you want to do a quick introduction?
Oh, sorry. My name's Dee, she, they pronouns. I'm an advocacy team member as well. I have unfortunately been delinquent, but I am here.
Great. I forwarded Jessica McHegg, who's one of our other advocacy team members, the invite. So hopefully she can join us in a second. So we wanted to kind of do a brief overview and talk a little bit about the legislative session, some of the things that GJL did. I am really interested to hear if other folks have been involved in this session and what your experiences were like. And we thought that we would talk a little bit about some of the bills that passed, why they were important, and also to kind of get feedback and talk a little bit about what we see as coming up or being needed in the next year. So I thought I would kick it over to James, and maybe James, you and I, since Jessica isn't here, can talk a little bit about our advocacy day and a little bit about your experience, and I can talk a little bit about our goals for advocacy day and how that went.
Sure, yeah. So it was my first time in Olympia and my first time lobbying. And so it was the advocacy day where we came together with Planned Parenthood and sort of joined forces on a couple bills. So we had met at the Abigail Stewart House in Olympia. I think there was 75, maybe close to 100 people there from different groups. It was like a really good energy, table set up and food and t-shirts, and everyone was kind of just chatting. And Danny and Elsie, the leader of Planned Parenthood, gave an introduction and kind of shared with people how we are able to benefit from an alliance together, and how some of the same bills protect both reproduction rights, abortion care, and gender affirming care. So that was cool to kind of solidify that. And then we broke into legislative district breakout groups. Some groups had like 2 people in them, like mine. Some had like 15 people in them. And some people had come prepared with written letters, and they'd done this a bunch of times. And a lot of them, like me, were brand new. And then there were some scheduled meetings, and a lot of them were with staffers, and some of them were with state senators or state house reps. And we kind of just went through the halls and tried to let people know how we felt. And I was paired with one other woman that I met that day, and we were met with a lot of support, and we were talking to Democrats, and it was a really positive experience. I loved it.
So glad to hear that. Jessica, it looks like you joined. Do you want to do an introduction? We just did our names, our pronoun, and sort of what we do at Gender Justice League, or what we're involved with. Jessica's audio might not be working. Yeah, I think, thank you so much for that, James. That's a really good summary of sort of the advocacy day. I think from my perspective, this was the first year in several years that we had a really concerted effort to mobilize people down to Olympia. since the bathroom bills in 2016 and 2017, if folks remember those. This was like, obviously with COVID, we weren't as active in Olympia, but it was exciting that we were able to mobilize so many folks and also partner with Planned Parenthood. It's a pretty big undertaking to coordinate legislative meetings, to turn out enough people to meet with both supportive and sometimes not so supportive legislators. And so it was really an honor that we got to do that this year. It can be a little bit challenging. And from my perspective, one of the things that I think has been really helpful on the back end as a lobbyist has been just how people's personal stories and experiences really move lawmakers. We actually won over some Republican lawmakers on some of our bills, which is pretty shocking. But that literally came directly from them hearing from individuals in their districts that were people of trans experience and their parents, particularly trans young people, about what access to gender affirming care meant. And I think that that's one of the things that was so cool about this year, was being able to meet in person and just get a chance to share our stories and to be seen in the legislature, which we aren't always, or it doesn't feel like we're always seen there. Jessica, I want to just double check and see if your mic is working. Give a second. I feel like Jessica can probably hear, but probably can't talk yet. So we thought we would go through some of the bills that passed this legislative session, bills that we were really strongly in support of or that we were very engaged in. This is not a comprehensive list of all of the bills that impacted our community. There were a number of bills that came up and that didn't get committee hearings. There were 2 anti-trans bills specifically, one that targeted trans youth and one that targeted trans women who are incarcerated in the Washington Department of Correction. Neither of those bills got a hearing. They didn't even get heard in committee. They didn't have co-sponsors. They just had one legislative sponsor. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but I thought that I would go over some of the bills that felt particularly important. And we're going to kind of each take a turn at answering some of these. So the first bill that folks have probably heard about, because it also happens to be the most controversial bill of the session. Honestly, it was a little bit of a surprise for me, but SB 5599, which was about providing safety and protection for unhoused young people who are seeking reproductive or gender-affirming healthcare. And the bill became controversial because in Washington state, when young people arrive at a shelter, if they are unaccompanied by an adult, like if an adult doesn't drive them to the shelter who is their guardian or parent, the shelter has to notify their parents within 72 hours that they have arrived at the shelter. That is a Washington state law. It's unique to Washington. Not every state requires that, and that's important to know. In fact, Washington is an outlier in that regard. There are many states where shelters aren't required to notify parents. SB 5599 allowed shelters to, instead of contacting parents directly, contact Department of Children and Youth Services. And then Department of Children and Youth Services can then contact parents on behalf to notify the parents of where their young person is. And this specifically applies to people who are seeking gender-affirming care or abortion. The reason why this is really important is that what we've seen is that in other states, there are laws criminalizing people who are seeking gender-affirming care and abortion now. And if parents are notified in those states, like say if a young person flees Mississippi or Texas or Arkansas, arrives in Washington state, goes to a shelter, and that shelter contacts that parent, if the parent becomes aware that they're, for instance, seeking an abortion, they could then be prosecuted in their state of origin for contributing to an abortion or having knowledge and failing to prevent or try to prevent a young person from getting gender-affirming care or an abortion. So that's one of sort of the instances that we envisioned, and why this law was needed is that it protects young people and parents from prosecution in other states. The bill also created a guest homes program, which is licensed by the state. And this is sort of, think of it as like informal foster care. So youth serving organizations license informal foster families with the state so that young people, rather than sleeping outside, can be in a supportive household. And this has been happening, informally for a very long time in our communities. A lot of queer and trans young people who end up sleeping outside may end up with supportive adults in their life, may find queer community members who let them sleep on their couch. This creates a legal and formal process to screen those adults and make sure that they're safe places for young people to be, to involve the Department of Children and Youth Services and a case manager in monitoring those homes and young people. And it also provides funding from the state to do that. Really important given that 40% of unhoused young people in Washington state are LGBTQ, and obviously not 40% of foster families in Washington state are LGBTQ. As somebody who was unhoused as a young person and did end up in this situation, it was hugely life-changing for me to be in a foster family with queer parents for my last year of high school. It allowed me to have stability enough to apply to go to college. Having been sleeping outside for a year and a half before that, it was a huge life changer for me. So it makes me happy that we were able to get that passed. It also, it connects. One of the requirements, one of the amendments was that it also would connect young people, would be referred for behavioral health services and family reunification services. This has been really vilified by the right, this bill in particular. I've received tons of hate mail about it. They've very much mischaracterized it, that we're gonna snatch kids and transgender them or whatever it is that they imagine. But that has been something that has been repeated over and over and over. And this bill doesn't change anything, really. It doesn't change the age of medical consent. You still have to be 18, unfortunately, in Washington state to consent to medical care, or your parents have to be involved. It doesn't change parental guardianship or parental rights in any way. But what it does do is it allows young people to stay beyond 72 hours in a shelter to get stabilized and to get the care that they need. So that's, I think, one of the really important bills that passed this session. Jessica, did I miss any parts that you were going to say? Jessica can hear. Ganesha, James, Dee, Kai, did I miss anything? Okay, I see a lot of no head shaking. Cool. And if folks have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and Kai will read them when we're done sort of talking about each of the bills. The next bill that we helped pass was SB 5028, which makes name changes safe or private, and also allows people who are lower moderate income to petition to have all of their name change fees waived. So this was really huge. So it allows several groups of people who are survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, to have their name changes sealed. It allows young people, anyone under 18 who changes their name, to have their name changes sealed. It also allows trans folks to have their name changes sealed. So previously, name changes were a public record. They also had to be published in a newspaper, or they were published in a newspaper, which meant that people could be doxxed and harassed based on their name change. They now can request that the court seal that document just simply by virtue of the fact of being a trans person, which is really exciting. Also important for survivors. I'm a survivor. I definitely know what it's like to have had, my ex-batterer stalk me and use public records to try and find my location, and it's terrifying. So this is one other way to provide another layer of protection for survivors. And it also allows organizations such as Gender Justice League or Oasis Youth Center, or anybody who's working to support people in getting a name change, to petition the court on that person's behalf and sign an affidavit asking that the judge waive their name change fee. Each judge, unfortunately, the law didn't specify what the metric is of how much people make in order to waive the fee. The law didn't get quite that granular, and that's because those rules are made up court by court. What we've seen in practice in King County is that often judges will waive fees for anybody at or below median area gross income, or about $60,000 a year in King County. It used to be that the court could only waive their fees, which was $50. And then when you register your name change with the county would assess another fee of $300 or $350. Now the judge can actually waive the county fee as well, which really we think will help a lot of people, because just getting the $50 waived but having to come up with $350 was not very helpful. And so now the court can waive all of those fees together. So that is really exciting, and that will be implemented starting July 1st. Ganesha, do you want to talk about HB 1155, My Health, My Data?
Good thing. Hi, Ganesha again. I'm a pronoun beginner Hershey. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about which is House Bill 1155. So House Bill 1155 was passed on April 17th. And it was enacted originally by Rep. Andana Slater. And basically what this bill does is it aims to protect data privacy for all Washingtonians, particularly those who are seeking reproductive and gender affirming services. As Danny was just mentioning, we know that we've seen an uptick in reproductive health service slashes and bans across the country. And as a result, we've seen a lot of folks escaping those areas and seeking out care elsewhere. And due to that, in the past years, we've seen recent legislation being passed as of this year, particularly, that limits individuals' abilities to access that care in other states and in other areas where it is legal. So what HB 1155 does is that it protects the rights of those individuals within Washington state by limiting the data that is released on their end and on the provider's end. As we know, as some of us may know, this also helps those of us who are in the queer and trans communities and who are accessing certain social apps on a regular basis. Apps like Grindr, BetterHelp, Facebook, Instagram, and certain DNA testing services have been found to release health data to data buyers in recent years. And Grindr specifically had released, without the consent of individuals or without their explicit knowledge, had released information about individuals' HIV status. Which, as we know, is particularly dangerous to those communities. What this does is it allows for right-leaning politicians and lawmakers and their supporters to buy up this data and essentially create a list of individuals that they would like to target. And that's what we're seeing actually happen this year in the legislative session. Some specifics of this bill, some specific guarantees, of this bill are the right to withdraw consent and request data deletion, restricting geofencing around healthcare facilities, prohibiting collection and sharing of health data without consent, which is a huge one, requiring entities that collect this data to provide consumers with a privacy policy disclosing the use of health data. So we have a pretty well-rounded system of protection now for our communities. And I'm already seeing a lot of states take notice of this and following suit by drawing legislation that's very similar. So this is a really huge win for our communities around gender affirming care, but also reproductive justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ganesha. Yeah, an example of like why this feels so, it's a first in the nation bill, which I think is also so cool. Kind of like Ganesha said, like other people are taking notice. And also, you know, like one of the ways that prosecutions can happen, even if Washington State, we're going to talk about the SHIELD law in a second, even if Washington State doesn't participate in an investigation, a criminal investigation, those states, like say Texas, can purchase private data, like from a data broker, and that data broker can say, oh yeah, like this person went to Planned Parenthood. Oh yeah, this person went to UW Surgical Clinic at Harborview to get gender affirming care. Oh yeah, this person did go see Dr. Stiller in Spokane. And that's all they need for prosecution. If you return back to Texas or Idaho or Wyoming, say, they can purchase that, the state can purchase that data, like publicly available health data from apps on the commercial market, and they don't even need a search warrant to do it. And we've already started to see this happening in some states around mifepristone, which is the abortion access pill. So it's really incredible that we were able to get this passed. There's a lot of opposition to this bill from tech companies. And I think that it's, you know, the bill itself is not perfect, but it's a really amazing start that some states have started to say, no, like people need to be able to control their health data. Doesn't matter what the app is, people need to be able to buy in. So thank you so much for summarizing that, Ganesha.
Yeah, and I have like just a couple more little things to add on to
Yeah.
what you're making. It's also huge just because it modernizes a lot of our protections within law. As we know, a lot of lawmaking within each of our respective states is a bit antiquated in terms of its progression alongside technology. And we see a lot of those antiquated laws and lack thereof affecting our safety as trans and gender diverse individuals within communities for reasons I mentioned earlier, particularly on apps and sites that we're using, but also at work. And with the work that a lot of us here particularly are doing on behalf of community, working for community Oryx, we hold a lot of data that is going to support our communities further with grants, but also data that we use internally to formulate different initiatives that we are enacting to serve our communities, right? So it allows us to have more of a peace of mind when we're collecting and also exchanging this data amongst ourselves and with each other. And I like to say that in the future, the only recognizable currency will likely be data. And so it's really important that we're acknowledging that by doing everything we can now to protect our own personal data, but also the data of our communities going forward. And I think the bill really sets that into center stage for individuals.
Awesome, thank you. James, do you want to talk a little bit about the SHIELD law and sort of what it did and why it's so important?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as we know, reproductive care, abortion care, gender affirming care is now criminalized in much of the country. And a lot of people are coming to Washington to receive that care or potentially will be coming in the future. So the SHIELD law is set up to try to protect people who are coming here and receiving care or providing care from being criminalized and prosecuted in another state. So it does this a couple ways. One is by classifying, first of all, this healthcare into a protective class. So it's now in a special class where anyone that's coming and wanting a subpoena for anything related to healthcare in this protective class, basically they're not allowed to do it, and they have to sign something saying that that's not what they're doing. And if anyone from another state does try to do that, law enforcement from another state, then they'll be fined. And it also restricts the funding from Washington state going to Washington to state police and any agencies here from putting funding towards assisting any sort of a criminal investigation that's going on here. So in the past, where most state law enforcement would cooperate with other states in criminal investigations, now there's some significant barriers to that. And extradition, for example, is not just easy to do. So yeah, it's basically just protecting people here from doing what is legal here.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that that's the kind of other thing that's interesting about the SHIELD law. These are new, so they pass in a lot of different states, and it takes a very different approach. So if basically the law says the state won't fund any of these processes, no judges can be paid, no state troopers can use any state funds. It's really about the funding to do any of these things like extradition or investigation, as opposed to just straight up saying we won't extradite people because that's technically unconstitutional. So it's interesting, it like takes a very different approach to trying to prevent extradition, and it protects people in Washington state and people who travel to Washington state in both of those ways, which I think is so important. And certainly now that we're seeing criminalization in neighboring state like Idaho, it's really, really vital. The next two bills, so one of them is HB 1340, which is provider licensing protections. This is very similar. It basically protects providers in Washington state, so medical doctors, surgeons, therapists, nurses, anybody who's licensed by the Department of Health. It protects their license from being attacked by another state. So if, say, somebody travels from Idaho to Washington state to have gender-affirming care, Idaho might try to attack their license. There's this thing called the Interstate Compact, which allows doctors licensed in one state to practice in another state or to transfer their license to another state. It's like a contract between all of the state, not all of them, but like 34 of the states. And so other states like Texas is in the Interstate Compact, Idaho is, part of that agreement is that if the Board of Medicine in Texas finds against a doctor, like finds them guilty of malpractice, for instance, even if that doctor is in Washington state, Washington will honor that decision and will strip the doctor in Washington state of their medical license to practice. And so this bill stopped that in this specific instance and said, no, we don't recognize the rights of other states to punish Washington state practitioners if they facilitate gender-affirming care of any kind or abortion. It also says that if you are disciplined in another state, like say you performed an emergency abortion in Idaho and you were stripped of your medical license in Idaho, and hopefully you didn't go to jail, but they just like stripped you of your medical license. If that doctor comes to Washington state, Washington says, we will not hold that against you. We will allow you to become licensed in Washington state and to provide care in Washington state. So it protects providers, and the hope is theoretically that it also would incentivize providers who might be facing a decision like, do I save this person's life? Do I allow them to die? If I'm saving this person's life, I'm going to lose my medical license. Some doctors might say, well, I guess I'm going to save this person's life and I'm just going to move to Washington because I know that I won't be extradited from Washington and I know that my medical license will be protected there. So we kind of put those two together so that it's like providers have that, choice of conscience that they might be able to have. So that's another bill that passed this session. It was really important. And the final bill was another bill that was a first in the nation bill, and it was HB 1335. And it was called Justice for Victims of Doxing. And it basically it allows people who've been doxed, which means that somebody has publicly released confidential or difficult to obtain private personal data, your address, your phone number, your social security number, a picture of your house, where you work, other details in order to harass you or to encourage harassment of you. You can seek a court protection order, similar to like an anti-harassment order. So the court can order that person to cease and desist. And if they fail to follow that court's order, it then becomes a criminal charge of malicious harassment. So the court orders them a civil order that just says, cease doing this right now. And if they violate that, then that's a crime. And it also allows people who have been victims of doxing to sue for damages. If you've been harmed financially, if you've had to like increase your security, if people have harassed you, it would allow you to, to sue in civil court and to have essentially what's called a private right to action. It's another interesting part about My Health, My Data, the bill Ganesha was talking about that I kind of forgot about. There's also a private right to action as well, which was something that was fought out between the House stripped the private right of action, the Senate put it back in, and it did make it into the final version I found out yesterday, which got signed by the governor today. And that private right to action means if somebody sells your confidential health data, you can sue them for the damage that might have caused. So did I miss anything, James, Ganesha, Kai, any bills? I feel like we covered most of it. Want to open it up to folks who might have questions. That's kind of a summary of what happened here in Washington State. If anybody has any questions, Kai, have you gotten any questions from folks?
No questions so far, but yeah, we want to open it up to folks. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be moderating and I'll be reading your question aloud.
Yeah. I think it's also, in the face of what is happening nationally, we definitely have seen, like in neighboring states, obviously what's happening in Montana right now, what happened in Idaho through their session. We've seen like more than 400, I think it's like 433 anti-trans bills all over the country. GJL has been trying to support folks organizing in other states by doing trainings, by sending people documents in one-pagers. We've been doing some fundraising, like staff have been doing fundraisers for other organizations to try and help them raise money, doing coaching and mentorship and support of local communities elsewhere, share our experiences of like how we organized our lobby day, how we've managed like the press and doing kind of trainings on how to speak to reporters. We've been trying to help folks in other states. There's been such an overwhelming onslaught of these bills. It's really been disheartening to see how difficult it's been in many other states. It also has been really amazing, at least for me, it's been really amazing to see how many bills we did get through. It's very difficult to get this many bills on our issues through the legislature in any one session. And it was incredible that we did get so many bills through this year. I think this is more bills we got through more bills in 1 year than we've gotten through in like 4 years, the last 4 years, positive, proactive bills. So I thought that that was really heartening about this session this year.
Thanks, Danny.
Agreed.
Go ahead, Ganesha.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I was going to say, we had a lot of corporate opposition here. It wasn't just right-winger like citizens, like, jumping in these briefings. It was major corporations and the representatives coming out, particularly for My Health, My Data, as it benefited them most for that bill to be turned down. So just keeping an eye out for that, but also what a major success on part of our community that we were able to get these bills passed, even with this opposition and the corporations that run Seattle.
Yep. There's another bill that did die that we were supporting called the Keep Our Care Act. I think that's important to mention. And that basically would have allowed the Attorney General's office to monitor hospital mergers. So one of the other dynamics happening in Washington State is that there are really a lot of Catholic hospital chains, Provident, Peace Health, I'm trying to think of the other one, but they basically control almost 80% of the hospitals in Washington State are owned or affiliated with Catholic hospital systems. And as they purchase new hospitals that might be private, they can say, we're a Catholic affiliated hospital. We do not believe in abortion or gender affirming care. Those procedures can no longer be provided at our hospital. The bill that died this session, Keep Our Care Act, would have required that the hospitals guarantee in the purchase that the types of care that were already provided will continue to be provided, and that the Attorney General's office would monitor and oversee the hospital mergers to ensure that the care continued. This is particularly important, and I don't know if folks are familiar, there have been cases of like trans people, transgender person, Mac Ohana, died shortly after trying to seek inpatient care at Peace Health in Bellingham. Mac went in a mental health crisis, was trying to seek inpatient commitment and was refused entry because they didn't want Mac to identify as trans or to wear a chest binder. He left and died shortly after. And it's like a very clear, like that really, I knew Mac and like very personally, impacted me hugely. And we've heard of many other people being turned away just based on their gender identity. And so it's a bill that we're really committed to. And, it made it a little further this year. This is the 3rd year we've asked to have it introduced. And so I just want to put that out there for folks. If you're interested in what you can do between now and next session, the Keep Our Care Act is a really important one for us to be talking to legislators about, because it definitely has a huge impact on our community. So I heard that there's some questions. Kai, do you want to ask them?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. One is, which Republican legislators turned out to be receptive?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know right off the top of my head, but I can go back. If you want to shoot me an email, Danny@genderjusticeleague.org, I can send you a list. Yeah, I was pretty surprised that we peeled off some Republicans. But I think even on SB 5599, the controversial bill, we did get 2 House Republicans and a Republican senator. Yeah.
Sweet. Our next
I'm
question.
really bad with names. I'm on the East Coast, so it's a little bit later for me. And I'm like at the end of a long week. So I'm like, I don't remember people's names.
Names are hard. Our next question is, which Democratic legislators need some encouragement or education to be more supportive?
That's a really good question. Ganesh, I don't know if you know, but I would say Mark Mullet, Senator Mullet, was the most resistant of the Democratic caucus in the Senate, and took a lot of handholding, didn't vote with us on a couple bills. But most every other House and Senate member were on our side. But Senator Mullet, I think, has been and is known to be the most conservative member of the Democratic Senate caucus. So if folks are in Senator Mullet's district, always a good time to go and introduce yourself. Never a bad decision to go say hello. Just like introduce yourself, get to know them, have like a 10 or 15 minute visit with them, go to an event. And honestly, it sounds like Washington State is still small enough that I feel like legislators can get to know their constituents on a one-on-one basis. And sometimes, like if a bill comes up, legislative assistants especially, it's helpful to know the legislator, but if you know their legislative assistant, the legislative assistant might reach out to you and be like, what do you think about this bill? Like, does this impact you? Does this make sense? Would you be willing to testify about it? It's helpful to kind of, for us collectively, to build those relationships and to strengthen that muscle. And certainly, you know, as the session has ended, we're now working to try and educate, and I will let everybody know, educating legislators about what gender affirming care for young people means and what it looks like, because they don't understand. And there's a lot of misinformation. I think people in the community do understand what gender affirming care for young people can look like. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and legislators are also subject to that. And they're also going to be in the community having to face the misinformation. And they're going to be the ones that are being asked to speak on behalf of trans young people, which is why it's like so important for all of us to kind of build relationships with them, because they are often trying to like address a lot of different topics that they're not very expert in. You know, they might be really passionate about environmentalism, and that's why they ran to be in the legislature. They might be an environmentalist, but they don't know a lot of things about trans stuff, and they're still expected by people in the community to speak on behalf of trans youth. And I've heard some things this session that were very concerning, even from Democratic lawmakers, did a lot of handholding and explaining. But I think it's just, sometimes it's helpful for them to have somebody to like hear from, to talk to hear your personal experience, and to like have a private one-on-one conversation where they are not feeling judged, or where it's not in a crowded room where there are cameras. They can ask questions so that when they're then having to talk publicly about these bills, they feel more confident in their answers. So I think Senator Mullet could use that. I think there are probably a lot of other legislators who could, and definitely would encourage folks to just get to know folks. Yeah.
Thanks, Danny. Our next question is, thank you for all your work. What is the best way to receive legislative updates from GJL for the coming session? I can answer this. I recommend signing up for our newsletter. You can sign up for that at gender-affirming.org/updates, and I can put that in the chat for everybody. And then second to that, I would also recommend following us on social media. We're at Gender Justice WA on Twitter and Instagram. On Facebook, we're at Gender Justice League, and we post kind of some broader updates there. Anything else to add from anyone on that?
No, I think those are both great ways.
Cool. Another question, is there any usefulness in putting pressure on corporations that are in opposition to these bills, and who are they?
It's a really good question. Ganesha, do you want to tackle that? I feel like you have such a good perspective because you like saw it and heard it and like, yeah.
Yeah, my memory is also not amazing, but I wanted to see, Danny, if you wanted to name some of them, and then I can talk a little bit about the answer to the question.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember. I might have to go back and research a little bit. And Kai, I think you have the name of the person that asked this question. I would have to research the professional associations. So there were several professional associations, but the big tech company, which is like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all are part of the Washington Technology and Business Alliance, and they came out in strong opposition to My Health, My Data. They also lobbied extensively in the background and were incredibly effective. And I feel like, cone of silence in community, this is the hardest I've ever had to lobby or like work, cajole, like arm twist, beg, plead, cry, send constituents to like talk to people, like really the hardest for that bill. I didn't think it was going to pass because the opposition corporations have people in Olympia 24/7, and they have multiple people in Olympia. They have like literally between all of the corporations, they have like 50 to 60 lobbyists that are there day in and day out. It's all that they do. They're like make appointments every day to go in and check on the status of these bills. And they're able to peel off lawmakers one by one and sort of sow confusion, misinformation, and fear. I think the Democratic caucus really held strong this year. And I just want to like say, I'm so grateful for like Senator Dingra and Senator Peterson, and some of the other like senators and House members who were like champions of My Health, My Data, and like really stood strong and like we'll like in the back rooms be like, this is gonna pass. Like, I don't care what other bill, this is gonna pass. But I think that more than like holding corporations accountable, it often feels like a pebble. For me, it feels like a pebble in a pond where it's just like, it doesn't have a huge impact. I think thanking and rewarding like positive reinforcement of the legislators that did pass that bill and being like, thank you for passing that bill. Like, because they're going to hear about it. And a lot of them are actually probably going to face what the corporations are going to do next to punish them. This is kind of, they do a carrot and a stick thing where they're like, oh, if you vote against this, we'll give you a campaign donation. If you vote against it, we'll run an independent expenditure against you, which is like, the dark money, evil mailers, scary commercials. A lot of them will face that from these corporations for passing My Health, My Data. And I think thanking the lawmakers and being like, I understand that this was a hard vote. Thank you for doing it. It means a lot to our community to have our data be private and not just have anybody like blasting our trans status. Like, anybody can buy it for $2 on the internet. Like, thanking them is really powerful, and it makes legislators like more willing in the future to help us. That'd be my advice. Corporations going to do what corporations going to do, and they do not care. Like, they rich, they do whatever they want. Sorry, Ganesh, go ahead.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, so to answer the second part of that question, I would just say to utilize your investments in terms of opposition against these corporations, particularly, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. A lot of us have that are here representing different organizations in Washington State, particularly, that may have connections to these corporations. And so a lot of them, have their strongholds here in Washington State. For myself personally, like in trans community, I'm seeing a lot of activity by Glamazon, which is a separate entity of Amazon that's working with queer and trans community. Quite often, a lot of us receive either funding or other resources from Glamazon. I think like these meetings that we have with funders that are connected to these corporations can be really essential to utilizing resistance against them. And as we know, a lot of opposition from within equates to nothing or close to nothing within corporations. But utilizing employee bases are really important. getting, empathy from employees and understanding of how certain bills are affecting our community, and that the higher ups in the corporations that they're working for are contributing to this problem, informs them of where they're working, but it also gives them enough information that they can formulate actual beneficial ties to our communities, right? Because they have that understanding. So I think, as exhausting as constantly educating people may be, much less educating funders, if you can utilize those meetings, I think that's great. Also, it's really difficult to say in terms of like resistance against these corporations, because Danny said like it's kind of a drop in the pond. But I truly do believe in the power of the people. And I believe that, if you want to organize actions in the street, like go for it. I'm a big believer in that. I think that putting pressure on these corporations at their headquarters is an amazing idea, and we have a very unique opportunity to do that as citizens of Washington State. And I also want to warn against like falling into controlled opposition, right? Which is, a term many of you may or may not be familiar with, but these corporations collect, as we mentioned, a lot of data on all of us on a regular basis. The more we utilize these social networks and the technologies therein, and they analyze our behaviors as well. So they understand who we are, what we know, who we work for, et cetera, as well as our daily routines. So I think the less that we're, posting about things and not including, spreading awareness about, the evils of a lot of these laws that are passing and the intentions of these corporations, but the less that we're posting about the actions that we're taking part in, or the organizing efforts that we're making within these corporations or within our connections to them, is really important to not falling into that controlled opposition narrative where we are then working for them or falling into the traps that they lay for all of us that diffuse a lot of those movements. Thank you.
Thanks, Ganesha. One person also added a comment around this. If people are involved in their local political party orgs, possibly get those orgs to send a letter to those major corporations encouraging them to support My Health, My Data.
Also very possible and a very great idea.
Yeah.
And I suggest.
I love it. Okay, next question. How can orgs best collaborate / support you all for the next legislative session?
It's a really good question. I think hopefully next year we're going to have a summit prior to the legislative session. My vision or my goal is to do more work in the run-up. This session kind of caught up, happened really quickly, and we kind of got caught off guard with like SB 5599. Literally, we didn't even know the bill existed till the day before the hearing. And I don't know if folks heard, but like 6,000 opposition people showed up to that hearing, and it was just like chaos. So I think next year, GJL and ACLU, Planned Parenthood, other folks are going to try to be a little bit more prepared. We're going to try and have a community summit and try to have more direct feedback to the community and other organizations to build a stronger coalition, and to just get feedback from people about what types of legislation we would like to see. Because, even GJL, I'll be honest, I'll give an example, and this is not judging or shaming anyone, but many of these bills were signed today, and there were no trans people at the bill signing, even though all of these bills were involve gender affirming care, right? Even though we mobilized as many, if not more, people and phone calls than bigger organizations than us, given that we have a tiny budget and tiny staff, they literally didn't even think to invite us, even though we worked really hard all session for this. And that is often the dynamic in Olympia that happens. It's we're only there when it's convenient or that people want to take credit for the work that happens. And then as soon as they get the credit, we're right out the door. So I think we just have to be more strategic. And it also means that GJL doesn't hear about stuff sometimes because people just forget that we exist or forget to tell us. I think the more that we can work all together and just stay in touch and try to have a forum, and we're going to be thinking creatively about how to do that, going into the next session. And the more we can kind of like try to communicate and be like, what did you hear? What did we hear? Like, what's the priority for you? I think the better, because oftentimes things are happening and moving, and there's all over the country, a lot of cis people talking to a lot of other cis people about trans people. And there's like not a single trans person in that room. They just do not know or care. And they're gonna like legislate about our lives, like for or against. And I'm glad that our bills are positive, but also like, does not always feel great when they're just like randomly saying weird stuff about trans people in support of us. Like, what are you talking about? That's really not helpful right now. So I think that that's my hope, is that we'll have more of a forum, hopefully like leadership summit in the fall, and hopefully we'll be able to like send out much bigger, broader community invites. I think being signed up for our newsletter will definitely try to notify everybody when we do that going into the fall, so that next session we're a little bit more prepared. Next session is a shorter session. It's half as long. It's even more chaos. It's just like happens like so quickly. There's only like 20 working days in each house to pass bills. So it happens very fast. And yeah, so I think that that's the plan for next year. And folks are always welcome to reach out to me.
Thanks, Danny. Getting a lot of support in the chat for the things you just said. One person says yes to all that across the board. I made a joke to Danny this morning that I was going to Photoshop pictures of all the trans organizers who worked on those bills into the photos of the signing this morning and then reshare them on social media. Not sure if that's a joke or not. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. We'll see. Next question is, since we've seen police restriction rollbacks happen in the legislature, is there work being done to make sure we can maintain the legislative gains made this session?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've been really disappointed. I feel like, yeah, I like literally have like a heartache hearing that and knowing. I feel like this brings up a really key point, which is like, we have to kind of keep both eyes. Like I sleep awake with like one eye taped open, staring at like the legislature and like the governor, because like I just don't trust. Like the trust is not there. And like as soon as there's not pressure, they like repeal stuff and we don't hear about it, or they defund something. They're like, you know, have a big celebration, we're doing this thing. And then like suddenly like 2 years later, there's like no funding for that thing. They make this big promise, they celebrate it, they get all the like, you know, applause, and then it's like there's no money a year later. And we're just like, what's happening? I think it's very real. I'm really disappointed at, you know, police accountability and particularly decriminalization efforts. I feel like there has been such a uniform backlash. And this is also something, you know, like when I have legislative visits with lawmakers, I talk about a number of things. The bills that we know we're going to get through, I don't waste time on like, okay, these bills, like the caucuses, they're high priority, they're going to get through. I try to always push the needle a little bit in those meetings. I was really surprised at how much pushback I got in bringing up things like decriminalization efforts, talking about like reducing sentencing, talking about like reevaluating the war on drugs policy because it so disproportionately impacts our community, talking about like conditions in prisons and mental health crisis in Washington state, or housing. Gets so much pushback on those issues. And I do think that it really is something that we have to continue to mobilize across movements and throughout movements, and to build alliances and figure out where we can support other efforts. My hope, and this is going to sound strange, I hope next year we don't have a ton of trans bills and we can focus on other issues that will move the community forward more broadly and hold legislators, including Democrats, accountable in a really big way. Sometimes these bills are like, I mean, they're great. And also like, are they great if people are like getting arrested and incarcerated at like alarming rates, or people can't get into housing? It's like, okay, I don't know how much this bill is the most helpful. So I think that that's future work. And if people have thoughts or suggestions or want to like create connections or relationships between GJL and other organizations, we're always here for that. And we're always like watching and monitoring and trying to support our partners and community as much as possible. So that's, I think, what I would say about that. It was very disappointing. Like, yeah. It feels like that. It's like, I often worry, like, are we giving cover to like Democrats doing bad things? You know what I mean? Like, look, we help trans people. And then like the other hand, they're like doing terrible things on the back end. I think that that is always a really big challenge.
Thanks, Danny. Next question. Do you foresee any full faith and credit clause challenges to the laws amended by HB 1469 from other states that have banned abortion and gender affirming care, seeking to enforce their state's court orders, warrants, etc.?
Oh, for sure. It's coming. So what that question is asking, in the US Constitution, it says that if one state requests another state to extradite somebody for a crime, and the state that has the person, say Washington State, you know, if they're trying to extradite me to Texas, I'm in Washington State, the Constitution says Washington can't refuse to send me to Texas. And so it is going to happen invariably that there will be lawsuits. And I think what these laws do is buy us time. And I think the thing that is needed and what we've seen be successful is community has to mobilize around people who they're trying to extradite and make it socially and politically impossible for states to extradite people. Like these laws are not ironclad. They slow down the process, but they're not going to halt it. And I think that part of what it is it buys us time to mobilize to prevent the extradition, and that's something that we can do. It is going to be challenged under full faith and credit, and I don't know how that's going to land, but I'm certain that states like Texas with lots of money and aggressive, like horrific approaches are going to try, without a doubt. And I don't know how well the law will hold up to that. It is an open legal question.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah.
Next question. What is the best way for trans youth to get involved?
It's a really good question. The advocacy team is a really good way for trans youth to get involved. I think hopefully next year we will be able to have a trans youth advocacy day. That's like my pipe dream. I have done that in like 18 or 19 states, Iowa, Mississippi. Like we've had like queer youth advocacy days in Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma this year, Kansas, and we've kind of supported folks in putting that together. My hope is that in Washington next year, we're not a specifically youth serving organization for some like bizarre, because we serve survivors of gender-based violence. There's some like clauses in some of our grants, our like service grants, that make it a little tricky. But next year, I'm hoping that we can partner with other organizations to have a trans youth advocacy day. And so I think definitely that's a really key way that young people can get involved. Also, young people just contacting their legislators, setting up a meeting, and just going to meet them and ask for a 15-minute appointment. Almost every legislator will, especially if they're not in session, will meet with constituents for 15, 20, 30 minutes. Almost all of them love constituent meetings, especially if it's not like they're going to get yelled at by the people that are the yellers, shall we call them. I'm sure we can all imagine who they are. But young people, I think most legislators are excited to meet with young people and hear about their lives and their experiences. And I think that in any way that we can support trans young people in our lives, like go with them to meet legislators, bring them to legislative district meetings, just to share their experiences. And even just to say, like, it's scary what's happening in other states. Will you make sure that that doesn't happen in Washington? And getting legislators on record to say, yeah, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen here. I think that those are all really powerful ways young people can be involved.
I have a couple more for you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think also there's a lot of youth-led street activism and organizing efforts across the nation right now. I just empower youth to look into those. You can just Google youth like gender-affirming care action, and it will come up with like different efforts that are being made around the country that are all unified. All those organizers are in contact with one another. There were marches that were done earlier in the month as well, and last month. Around those exact subjects. And I forwarded those opportunities to several different youth. Another way is to hit up any educational institutions that you might be connected to in the area that particularly serve youth, K through 12, and offer to give parent and youth gender and transgender competency courses, if that feels like something you're capable of or something that your organization already does. This will allow you to build relationships with youth and understand where they or their parents may lack understanding of the current issues that we're facing as a community right now and what they can do to be a part of those things.
Those are awesome suggestions. Trans Pride Seattle is also coming up Friday, June 23rd. Another great opportunity for young people to meet other young people. And then also like getting connected with other youth organizations like Stonewall Youth. Yeah, the Rainbow Center has a youth program, Lambert House in Seattle. All of those folks are really amazing. Odyssey Youth is really amazing. Any other questions?
Nope, no other questions so far. So put your questions in the chat if you have any. And I'll just kind of add to what Danny and Ganesha shared already, you know, around Trans Pride. I think especially for trans youth, like as you can find ways to organize and advocate that feel fun and life-giving, you know, that's really, really important. And shameless plug for organizing with Trans Pride Seattle. We're planning it right now on Monday evenings. We welcome you to join. It's really fun. You know, you get to like meet other people and build skills that you might not otherwise have. And then we get to have a really big party in June and it's huge fun. So yeah, just a plug to find ways that feel like enjoyable for you also to advocate and to organize. Other questions still in the chat? Does anyone want to filibuster?
Are there any bills that folks were following or watching that we didn't mention that felt really important to you, or bills that you were hoping would pass that didn't pass? I feel like sometimes I get like so tunnel vision because it's like, it feels like such a slog to get one bill through that you can sometimes just like miss the forest for the trees. So I'm curious if other folks, there are other bills that people were watching or hopeful about that we didn't mention. I feel like I can have it so that people can unmute themselves. I don't know if you saw that, Kai, that it's an option. Participants can unmute themselves.
Yeah, we can do that. And in fact, it's
Sure.
probably safe to do so now that we're an hour in. I feel like any
Yeah.
trolls that were here probably wouldn't have waited an hour.
Yeah.
But it helps to be unmuted.
We
So
have been getting a lot of trolls, unfortunately. So it's
I
been
know.
like a thing, our emails, our voicemail, it's been obnoxious.
Yeah,
So
but
you can unmute yourself if folks want to have anything they want to add or say. You should be able to unmute yourself. Cool. That's
I
all
got
I
a
have.
question, Danny, real quick.
Yeah.
Do you know for the name change bill, is that retroactive? People who've already done it can go back and seal it?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I do think that people should be able to petition the court. It's called an ex parte petition. So you would have to draft the petition yourself. And it can be pretty simple. And then there's a specific court that meets called the ex parte. It's like a court that hears cases that are not the normal cases, like not family law or et cetera, in ex parte court. And I've gone through ex parte court with people to help them seal their name changes. And essentially, it's really like not an open courtroom for the most part. It's literally a judge at a bench and you like walk in and it's kind of like their office. You hand them the petition, they read the petition, they ask you some questions. After this bill takes effect, that judge can then seal your past name change. Yeah, so they should be able to. The bill is retroactive in that way. Ex parte court, the filing fee is not very much. It should be like $25 or $30. It might be a little bit more like $45. You can probably get that waived. Oftentimes ex parte judges forget to even ask people to pay their fees, I've noticed. Not great for the judicial system, but like, I think because it's just like a lot of random petitions that happen in ex parte. But we've done this also, like you have to go to ex parte, like some states require a like judge ordered change of gender, like Wisconsin, for instance, you have to get a judge to agree. And we'd have to draft the petition, go to ex parte and have the judge sign that. It's a very bizarre thing, but yes, people should be able to retroactively go back in ex parte, ask a judge to seal your previous name change, and then you would have to work with the clerk to register the seal. Yeah. Bryce.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I'm a member, or I'm on the e-board for the 46 District Democrats, and I guess I was wondering, and you might not be able to talk about this for networking reasons, if there was already like a strong gender justice league connection with the state Democrats, like not necessarily like the caucus, but the organization, and also just what smaller Democratic organizations could do beyond lobbying legislators in support of these bills during session, like what we can do year round to just make the Democratic Party more of an ally.
Yeah, I would say that like we do not have as strong a relationship to people inside the Democratic Party as we used to. There are a lot of reasons. I think COVID kind of changed the dynamic a little bit for us. And, you know, there's been some changeover at the Democratic Party, and we've also had challenges in the past. Like it can be challenging to like maintain those relationships and not be co-opted by those organizations. And sometimes people asking us to do work for them that's like not what we're set up to do or wanting to do. So I think any relationships to people is great. We're pretty laser focused on what we do. And so as an independent advocacy organization, we also try to like steer clear of being too deeply involved in like intra-party organizing. Definitely happy to have conversations with people that are like in legislative district groups or committees about strategies and tactics. I think overall continuing to like do education and routinely remind members and educate members about like gender affirming care, why it's important, why these attacks are happening, and why Democrats should stand against them. I think education is really vital. And as folks probably know, there's a very concerted movement of TERFs all over the world, all over the country. And that is like pervasive, and it's in the Democratic Party as well. Some of the nastiest things that have been said to me in this last session were like from TERFs inside the caucus that like said horrible things to me in meetings that I'm just like, that's not real. Like nobody's trying to come and replace you. Like we're not robots, we're not cyborgs. This is a bizarre conversation we've now delved into. So I think educating people and building those relationships, basic education can be really challenging, and it just is like continual ongoing effort. But I'd say that that's like my biggest recommendation. And then I think also anything folks can do from Washington State to support people in other states and to reach out to other folks. I think we're also seeing and starting to think about how to support people who are fleeing to Washington State. There is an exodus that is happening. People have been getting in touch with us. I want to say like almost 30 people since the start of the year. And I think LDs can be more involved in like supporting other LDs in other states as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Of course. Any other questions, comments? I think we probably can wrap up here pretty soon. Anybody have thoughts? Things that they would love to see next year in the legislature?
Well, I can definitely speak to this one. There was a bill that was introduced in another state about credit protections after name changes. That was extremely important because as we change our names, we also lose the ability to maintain a credit report that we've worked so hard on and could disqualify us from a lot of potential important things like housing, loans, etc. I would like to see Washington start working on those protections as well.
Awesome. That's a great suggestion.
Also just wanted to say, please hold your trans community, family, like siblings, like really tight during these times. I know events during the session particularly have caused us to do that by default, but just understanding that a lot of what we were seeing this session were trans people that were being pulled in by the right to testify against pro-trans movements and legislation. And there was a lot of misinformation coming out of those individuals, and they weren't all detransitioners either. Like, you know, that was not the only thing at play. And so a lot of people that, like, you know, we know personally, that we've worked with in the past personally, ended up being those people. And it was really sad. That was part of why it was so sad. Sorry for that pop-up. And so I just say, like, hold them really tight, the people around you right now, and ensure that we're constantly educating one another and providing each other with as many resources as possible, so we're not falling through the cracks and into the arms of our oppressors.
It's absolutely true. Cool. Y'all are amazing. So grateful for everybody's ongoing support. And Tyler, I see that you have your hand up.
I just want to say thank you very much to all of you who worked so hard on all this. I'm really grateful and appreciate you.
I'm grateful I get to do this. I feel like it's a lot better than the alternative. I don't know what oh yeah, I guess I was a health policy analyst and that was terrible. Really important stuff, but also too much. Too much. Thank you all so much. I hope everybody has a good night. So grateful for all of you. Thanks for coming out tonight. As always, we're available to answer questions. info@Gender Justice League is our general email. Danny@Gender Justice League. I try my best to answer emails. My inbox is pretty full right now as we're leaving session, but I try my best to get back to folks. And thank you all so much. We'll see you all very, very soon. Bye, everyone. Yay.
That was so good.
I'm going to stop our recording.